Welcome to FIDE
In a
Dialogues.
world that's always racing forward, sometimes we need to slow down and reconnect.
Connect genuinely, broaden your perspective, and share your passion.
Bonafide dialogues, where authenticity, creativity, and passion merge. Andrew Mayne is the founder of Interdimensional, an artificial intelligence service consultancy that helps companies deploy AI solutions. Prior to founding Interdimensional, Andrew was the Science Communicator for OpenAI and their first prompt engineer. At OpenAI, he worked on GPT-4, ChatGPT and GPT-3, creating many of the original prompts and examples used today. Andrew is currently the host of the OpenAI Podcast, where he interviews the staff and leadership of OpenAI. Alongside his AI contributions, Andrew writes mystery thriller novels. His works have been nominated for the Edgar and Thriller Awards, with series featuring characters including Theo Cray, Sloane McPherson, Jessica Blackwood, and Traska. Andrew was also featured in the Discovery Channel Shark Week special, Andrew Mayne, Ghost Diver, where he used AI and stealth technology to swim next to great white sharks in the Isle of Jaws.
We met probably like 1 month ago at the AI Summit in Silicon Valley. So I would love to start by asking you about your journey into this field. How did you get started in AI? And please tell us a little bit about your company.
Sure. So I, as a kid, had an interest in robotics and AI, which of course there wasn't, a lot going on at that point, that had changed as rapidly as we've seen now. I would build robots like robotic arms. I would use things like bicycle brakes for grippers. I would try to program in BASIC and write little, chat programs, and as a kid would try to figure that out. And the thing that I thought was always sort of neat, though, was to have it ask you like a favorite color or a movie and then save that as a variable, so that later on the chat learned, because that was one of the problems, is that chat bots that don't have any kind of memory, that start fresh every time, aren't as fun to talk to, because you're not really having a conversation with something that knows you. And we see that now with ChatGPT, the value of having a really long conversation thread, etc. So I was interested in AI, was interested in robotics, but I was also into magic and performing magic. And my senior of high school, I couldn't make up my mind if I wanted to go work in robotics or physics, or maybe go become a magician. And I decided, why not try to be a magician? And so I built a stage show, a big magic act with levitating a person, sawing somebody in half and all that. I had the help of my father, who understood about carpentry and taught that to me. So I built a magic
So
show.
your
And then I
dad
took it
didn't
around.
say, Andrew, go into robotics, right? He said,
No,
okay, do
he
magic.
always
So they supported
he
you.
he encouraged me to go do stuff, not talk about it. So don't be a person who says, "Oh, I'm going to go do this." Is go do it. So that was super helpful to me. So basically, I knew I had to go out there and do it. So I started traveling around the world. I performed on cruise ships and resorts. I lied about my age. I said when I was like 18, I said I was 23, just so I could get work, because I knew that for hiring a teenager, maybe was sort of a challenging, proposition. So I did that for several years, had a lot of experience at that, but I was still interested in the sciences, and I still found my way to get involved with that. I would teach an after-school course on critical thinking. I'd volunteer to do that. I just liked doing that. I ended up working for a foundation that worked in science literacy and promoting empirical thinking. And so I kept finding myself back into sort of the scientific world. I thought I wanted to do a TV show, and because I wanted to reach people through kind of, I wanted to teach critical thinking. I thought a good medium to do that would be through TV. So I started pitching a TV show where I was going to be this sort of kind of Bill Nye the Science Guy, but for critical thinking, and using magic as my way to introduce how we're fooled. And Hollywood being Hollywood, I found myself starring in a pilot for MTV. I found myself doing stuff for Cartoon Network, and being very far away from what my goal was, just more doing pure entertainment stuff. And then, spent several years in TV producing stuff, writing, doing pilots for stuff, and then ended up starring in my own TV show for the A&E network called Don't Trust Andrew Mayne, which I remember from a guy that says, "Hey, I want to teach critical thinking," to now I'm a guy hosting a magic prank show. So um, probably a little bit of a not quite a bullseye on what I was trying to do, but still interesting. after doing the TV show, I felt like, okay, well, I did the TV thing. I've kind of taken magic as far as I wanted to do. And then I thought, I really still liked AI. I still liked a lot of the, tech. I liked that. I thought maybe I should just get back into that. And this is at a point when I've already started my own TV show. I've already been writing books. I've been very lucky with authoring, and becoming like, bestseller and been a finalist for the Thriller Award, the Edgar Award, et cetera. But I still said, I'm in my 40s, but I still really want to do this thing. And I told some friends, I think I'm going to learn to code, like really learn to code. I think I'm going to get into AI. And they're like now, like just hire people. I'm like, no, I want to understand how it works. So I made a pivot and, it was more learning. It wasn't like I said, oh, I'm going to go create a company. I said, I just want to go learn how to do this. So I spent a lot of time just doing project after project, just learning different libraries, learning different ways to code, learning about AI. AI was at a very interesting point, and I thought it would be probably a good idea to create a project that took my experience in magic, where I was with AI and tech, and combined it into something. So I went to Discovery Channel and I said, "Hey, I think I could do something for Shark Week that was kind of cool, where I would try to make a great white shark think I was invisible, like basically do a magic trick on a great white shark based upon what I understood about science. And there were some things I'd learned about neural networks and vision systems that seemed to me to sort of overlap with how great whites saw. There's a thing we call like edge detection when you're trying to figure out, how one image looks like another or what the patterns are. Great white sharks are, you know, part of a species that's, 300 million years old. Sharks are older than trees, and their brains are pretty primitive, but they have to be very efficient. And so I thought there might be some similarities between that and vision technology that we were learning in AI. And Discovery Channel said yes. So I designed a suit to make myself invisible to great white sharks, did a TV special called Andrew Mayne Ghost Diver, went down to Australia, swam with great white sharks, used the suit. Sharks didn't eat me, which, isn't maybe the most rigorous scientific test, but, certainly satisfied my
Amazing. It's
curiosity.
amazing. It's very impressive how you can merge these two things, your creativity with your knowledge of technology.
Yeah, for sure. And for this was a case too where I was listening to people as they told me about, listening to shark researchers talk about, how great whites don't see a person in the cage, they see the outline of the cage and making that connection. It was a connection between that and what I was learning about vision systems. So I had just created a lot of projects to learn, both on vision systems work, how to create synthetic data, and just tried to solve problems, some of which I didn't realize that there weren't a lot of people trying to solve those problems at the time. And some of the stuff I was doing was, I want to say novel, but it was more frontier. It was the sort of thing only a few people were really had the time or bandwidth or cared to sort of try that. And then I tried playing out text generation models, and those at the time just weren't good. But then in 2019, OpenAI revealed GPT-2, which they'd scaled up GPT into GPT-2. I think it was like February of that year. And they showed that it was able to do really longer text, entire paragraphs, articles. They got a bit nonsensical towards the end, but it was fascinating. And I read every single output that they had posted on GitHub, a repo for code, and they put all these different things that GPT-2 had written. And I was amazed. As a person who's a novelist who writes books and who also is following AI, I'm like, this is elite because I understand the kinds of cognitive thinking you have to do in order to generate this. And again, these AI work in very different ways than we do, but it was still generating interesting things. So I talked about that. I was on podcast talking about it, talked about how I think this is really a very interesting point in time. And then a year later, OpenAI reached out to me and gave me access to GPT-3 before it had been announced. And I started showing them a lot of different applications for it because I'd been thinking nonstop about GPT-2 and saw what the limitations were at GPT-3. I saw these capabilities. And at first, I thought I was going to do a startup. I actually built something called AI Channels. If you go look on the OpenAI website back June in 2020, it was a chatbot like ChatGPT. It could search the web. It had tool calling. It had all these sort of features we're used to now. The problem was in 2020 is that GPT-3 at that point was very slow and very expensive. It was 6 cents per thousand tokens, and it took a while to get a response back. And to do this, I had to have prompts that sometimes took up half or more of the context window. And I thought, I want to create something really good. I think we're probably the next iteration, GPT-4 or whatever's coming next would be better for this. And so OpenAI said, "Do you want to come work with us?" I said, "That sounds great." And so I went to work with OpenAI, and my title was Creative Applications, Basically, I was their first prompt engineer. I was in-house prompt whisperer, and when people, were trying to figure out how to do something with the model, they'd ask Andrew, like, "Could you figure this out?" And I would just spend a lot of time and energy. I'm like, it was like a chimpanzee banging on coconuts, just trying to figure out how to get the thing to work. But started to just develop a reputation as a person that had a lot of intuition about how the models worked, and so spent time there figuring out different use cases, built out prototypes, and say, let's try this and just sort of see like, is there a there there? And that was a really fun experience. So
A
I did
lot
that
of
for several
testing,
years.
right?
What's
A lot
that?
of, a lot of testing.
Yeah, and but also like the researchers are great at their job. Like the researchers understand how to hit hard evals and how to look at that. I was looking at what are the things that we haven't thought about, or what else can these things do? Can I just get it to do something very different? If I see a little bit, if I get it to do a thing and it does something not the way I expected, I look at why it did the other thing and try to figure out, is this useful?
Mhm.
So I did that for a couple of years, and then I was asked by OpenAI to become their science communicator because they was helpful to have somebody. I was an engineer at that time, but it was helpful to have somebody who was an engineer who understood how these models worked, who then could talk to people like government, talk to the media, talk to other people about how these things work. So I spent 2 years as OpenAI science communicator, which was a very, very fun role. And then at the end of that, I just really wanted to play with the technology more. I just wanted to kind of get back to that. And I left and created a company called Interdimensional, which was basically just problem solving for other companies that were trying to deploy AI. Brought on a couple of the co-founders, started putting together fractional AI teams. We work with some very big clients now who basically are trying to solve ML problems. So started doing that, and but then a few months ago, my former boss, when I was the science communicator, came to me and said, "Hey, we want to do a podcast. Would you be interested in hosting that for OpenAI?" I said, "Kurt, that sounds fun. I love the company and wanted to be in a situation where I could sit down and talk to people." So I said yes to that.
So let's talk about your company a little bit. First of all, I
Hmm.
think it's amazing idea. I think it's so important right now. And the reason is many people are talking about AI bubble now because there's
Hmm.
billions of dollars are being invested in AI, but the output, the results, those impressive results are not there yet. So it seems like your company is right there helping different companies to adapt this technology, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the results are uneven. On one hand, you have a company like OpenAI, which has over 700 million active weekly users, right? So clearly, ChatGPT has been a runaway success, probably the most successful app we've seen for that kind of usage ever. They're closing on a billion users for this, which I bet, I don't have any internal knowledge. I bet you probably maybe at the end of the year or so, they'll probably neighbor there. So we can say that's been very, very useful. But there's a lot of other places where people try to deploy AI and it's not been as successful. And this is because AI has this jagged frontier and it's very capable in some ways. In other ways, it's not. And even somebody uses ChatGPT, you might be very happy with some results, but then might say, hey, this hallucinated that. And part of it is knowing how to use it. Part of it is the evolution of the product and learning how to, help the user use it. And part of it just making it better. Interdimensional, which is my firm, came about because a lot of people would go to OpenAI and say, "Hey, we want to do this," and OpenAI would be like, "We can do this, but that's really you need to hire somebody else to figure that out." Or a company might say, "Hey, we want to apply AI to some area like agricultural or like health, wearables or whatever," but they weren't quite sure how to take advantage of language models and do that. And I have a network of people I've worked with who are developers who've been building on top of the OpenAI's API and working with other technologies for years, half a decade, some of them, and said, okay, well, I could probably put together teams to go in and tackle these problems. Some of these people don't want to go work full time for another company because they're former Google, former OpenAI, former Wolfram, what have you, but they do like the idea of a really neat project. And so when a company comes to us with a really cool project, it's great because then I can say, okay, I can probably put together a team. If they come to us with a boring project, then it's like, probably not for us.
So yes, many companies identified, okay, we have this problem and we would like to use AI to solve this problem, right? But they don't know how. There are tools
Hmm.
out there, but they don't know how. And your company would come in and kind of connect these two things, right? How to use this amazing technology to solve your specific problems.
Yeah, and part of the premise of the company was traditional consulting firms, they kind of get their claws into a company and try to do these very long-term contracts and do that. That wasn't appealing to me because one, it kind of feels a little bit icky. Two, it's boring. And my my belief is that AI is going to continue to improve, continue to have more things it can do and become more complex. And if you're running a company, you're not going to have the perfect solution that's going to last forever. You're going to have to think of actively, of continuously, every 6 months or so, reevaluating, learning new tools, and continuing to, you're going to have to work for your money. And I thought, well, I could have a company that go help people do that. Basically say, hey, if we go in and we'll solve this one project for you. We'll do a very tiny project for you. And if that works out, well, then you're going to want to come back to us again and again and again. And then we just
Exactly.
develop this ongoing relationship.
No, I think it's great. No, that's wonderful. I think we need more companies like that because we have this amazing technology, like you said, a lot of problems that can be solved with this technology, but there's this disconnect, and your company is actually helping in this area. No, this is great. I'm glad we're talking about it, and hopefully many companies will listen to this
Yeah.
conversation and reach out to you.
Yeah, or I mean, the advice that I give is that these things are always evolving, and what you want to do is basically have a system to learn new things. And just literally, if you're a company that's trying to become more AI focused, set aside, every other week, a 45-minute meeting where people can talk about the tools they're using, what they're learning, sharing knowledge. It is the most primitive and most useful way for people to be able to learn new technology is to literally meet on a regular basis and talk about that. And often people say, "Hey, how do I keep up with this?" It's like, "Who are you talking to?" Like, "Well, I just look to the web." But I'm like, get together with a couple friends. This is just get together a couple friends because you increase the surface area by which you can discover new things. And so if your friend is looking for new things and your colleague down the hall is looking for new things, and the three of you meet on a regular basis, you've just multiplied your chances of finding out new tools or find out what's good or what's, better practices.
Right. And how to adapt this new technology. Yes. And the second point you mentioned, this new podcast, the OpenAI
Mhm.
podcast. I watched it. I think it's great, amazing podcast, and I think
Thank
it's
you.
so good. Yeah, it's so good for OpenAI, for their reputation. I think it's so helpful to meet these people who actually work on these projects, who create this magic, right? Amazing people. I really enjoyed one episode about education. I think it's great,
Hmm.
the best use of AI, in my opinion. Of course, in the medical field, it's very important too. I know Khan Academy has their own AI for education. It's called Kanminga, but it's
Hmm.
specifically created for Khan Academy learning. And ChatGPT has this new feature, study mode, that anyone can use, right?
Yeah, so they've added a new study mode, and basically the idea is that they know a lot of students are using ChatGPT, and like anything, if you just copy paste the answers, you're not going to learn. If you engage in a dialogue, then you learn. And so they developed a new mode where basically you can get into conversations with ChatGPT and learn. You can say, I need to learn about this in study mode, and it helps you learn by it asks you questions. You have to think sort of a Socratic method for that. And I think that that's, kind of a really exciting thing to see is that as we know, as we learn that people just use these tools in such large numbers, the more tools you can do to make this a better experience, the better.
Right. And specifically, many people have concern about using this kind of tools for education because you just ask the question and you have an answer. But this
Hmm.
new study mode actually helps you to learn, takes you step by step, uh, so you can think, not just get an answer, like kind of a shortcut, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just taking it to the next step to sort of, help you, have it be a partner in helping you and not just being another way to Google things.
Right. And you can have your own tutor. So many people can't afford tutors, but by using this AI tool, you can have your personal tutor. And there's so many children and even adults have difficult time asking questions when they're in the classroom, for example. But here you can ask any question.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a study before I left OpenAI about education in the classroom, and it was very interesting to see. And it's been a theme that's popped up a lot in other studies. Is that one of the it should be surprising, but maybe surprising benefits of ChatGPT and how it can help traditional education is that if you're a student that's shy or you're in a class where there's not enough time to ask questions, who do you go to? But if you go to ChatGPT, you have something that never judges you. There's no question too silly or too basic that ChatGPT isn't ready to help you with. And that can help students. We found that students who were quiet in classrooms felt very comfortable having long conversations with ChatGPT, and the next day could show up and be ready to learn. And that sometimes we forget that education works differently depending upon the course. You can have a bad semester in history and pick up the next semester in history because guess what? There's a lot of history. And you don't have to know anything about World War I to understand World War II. But if you have a bad semester in algebra, you're really not going to be well prepared for algebra 2 or geometry or trig or what comes later on. And that's one of the wonderful things about a thing like ChatGPT is it makes it very easy to have students have their own sort of personalized instructions and catch up.
And in terms of affordability, not everyone can afford a tutor, but most people have access to an AI tool, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've really been happy with is OpenAI has been making this widely available, the free tier. If you think about what the amount of access you get to ChatGPT for free now, it's pretty incredible. You can call 1-800 ChatGPT and you can talk to ChatGPT. Anybody can do that with a phone and you can get like a 10-minute conversation with this. And I think they've done a really good job of trying to make these things very widespread and available, not just to people who have, paid accounts.
Congratulations on your new podcast. I watch it and I recommend it to anyone interested in AI.
Yeah, I have a great group of people supporting me on this. At OpenAI, we have Hannah Wong, who was my former boss, who's, wanted to do this. Sonia Goyen, who's the one who runs it there. Justin Young, who is my producing partner on this, and Brett Rounsaville, and my wife, Rush Bhatia. She's been, it's helpful to have a really great team of people making this thing possible that I just go up there and, get to ask questions. And
Wonderful. Wonderful. And you mentioned that you're an author. And I heard
yes.
that you write like 2 books a year. Tell us a little bit about your books, please.
Yeah, so I started writing, I think back in about 2011, 2012. I started writing novels. I first did self-publishing. I like self-publishing because I didn't have to wait for some publishing house in New York to give me permission to have an audience. You could just do it yourself, and particularly via ebooks with Kindle. And was very lucky. I made the decision that I wanted to take this seriously, so I was going to write as many books as I could, like 10 books in a year, like write a book, then read a book on writing, write another book, and try to learn as much as I could about writing and, kind of take this sort of model of how do things get better? Well, they get better from experimentation and feedback from the world. And so that's what I decided to do. And so my first novel, Public Enemy Zero, I got very lucky that made it to one of like the top 10 thrillers on Amazon. That got me my first movie deal, and that got me my agent. And then I wrote another novel a few months later that became put me maybe one of the top 10 indie authors on Amazon, and then led to publishing deals, et cetera. So I was very lucky with that. And then basically would write, 2 books a year. And, I've gone through my publisher now is Thomas and Mercer, which is owned by Amazon Publishing. And that's been a great experience. And so I write a few different characters, and it's just, one of these things where it's nice to sort of be able to exercise that part of my brain that likes to do imaginative storytelling.
So it's interesting how you're passionate about AI, writing books, it's English behind it, and magic.
Yeah.
But AI and magic, it seems like they're very connected, right? If somebody from the past would come to 2025, they would think it's some sort of magic, isn't it?
There is some interesting connections. The person in magic that we consider the father of modern magic, Eugene Robert-Houdin, the French magician, he would make automatons, and this is in the 19th century, and these were mechanical figures that would perform all kinds of complex things like, acrobatics or even do magic tricks. They look like little tiny people doing this stuff. If you look them up, they're amazing. And remember, he was making this in the 19th century. And so there was this kind of interesting fascination because, magic is trying to do the impossible, and then robotics is the idea of creating life, and life is, the ultimate magic trick to produce that. Although every woman I know is capable of producing that, so take that what you want. And there was another interesting point was like, Harry Houdini made serial films. He made his own. He was tried to be an action star back in his day, and he actually did one that was like him versus a robot. There's a gangsters with robots, and so there is this weird little connection between magic and robotics.
So could you please tell us a little bit about magic? I heard that you worked with David Copperfield in the past, and you had your own show.
Yeah, so I was growing up, I was a fan of Doug Henning, David Copperfield, and Penn and Teller. And then when I was 18, I got to work as a production assistant on a David Copperfield magic special, the one where he flew, which was kind of an amazing experience because to get to see your idol up close and to watch how hard he worked was one, very intimidating because I just realized just how dedicated he was. And that made me rethink a lot of things. Was It's not like, hey, I did a thing, everybody's like, oh, that's great. Well, I'm gonna go out and hang out and have fun. It's like, no, he's in the theater making, things perfect, spending hours and hours, days and days doing this. So I worked for David Copperfield. So that was like as just a production assistant, just working on his TV special. And
Yeah.
then I went off, I performed in Japan. I had a show there, a headline to show there. Then I came back and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I worked for Penn and Teller for a while, helping create magic tricks for them. And that was another example of seeing people who just really took their craft seriously and watching them perform and just realizing that there was a big gulf between me and them. And that actually made me get out of magic for a long time. I got out of magic for several years. And it wasn't until I decided that I wanted to try to do educational television that I thought, why, magic, and maybe I can make that a part of it, that got me back into it.
Yeah, I watched a couple of episodes. I think they're still relevant after so many years. I recommend
Y-
people to search and find and watch some of them. I believe it's
Yeah,
available.
yeah. So yeah, when I did the A&E TV show, Don't Trust Andrew Mayne, the premise there was, could I use magic to help people get back at other people? This was 2012, I think this was. I did a 13. And so that was kind of a new premise at that time. And that was a fun thing because they didn't want just a straight up magic show. They said it's got to have a point or a story to it. And the story was I'd help, a spouse get up back at her husband who had been, ignoring some task or something like that. So it was a fun premise. It was fun to come up with that. I worked with a great team of people on that. The magic team that helped me come up with the magic tricks and made me look good later went on to work on David Blaine's TV specials. And so that was very, 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 very special experience to be able to work with, people who like names to magicians mean a lot, like Danny Garcia, Rico de la Vega, just a really, really cool, group of people that were there to help me out.
My son and I watched this show, David Copperfield show, the latest one. It's amazing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, such a legend. Yeah.
When you see David Copperfield's show, it's hard to imagine there will ever be a magic show at that scale, at that caliber again. There probably will, but right now, magic's in this point where big stage shows like that are fewer than they were before. And to have somebody who's thought about it as long as he had, and Penn and Teller have a great show too. And I think Penn and Teller, both their shows are both great, but for like big sheer magic spectacle, David's is incredible. And you think about the sophistication, the detail that goes into it. It's amazing. But
And
also
it's
like Penn and Teller.
storytelling, it's not
Yeah.
just magic, it's storytelling and it's amazing.
Oh yeah, he's creating. David has always been a fan of movies, and when you watch his show, you'll see how he's trying to create like a Steven Spielberg kind of movie in
Yeah.
real life. When you see that, there's dinosaurs, there's aliens,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
live, and that's the
Yeah, I
thing you
love
have to
it.
think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And with nowadays technology, you can really create something special. So I wanted to ask, are you planning to go back to magic because you're so creative and you understand technology so well? I can certainly see you creating something amazing.
I If I had more time, that might be fun. Now that, going from, a couple decades out of it and thinking about it from a different point of view, certainly you would think about like, oh, how would I try to do this now? But I don't,
You're
time,
also a storyteller, you have all the
yeah,
ingredients to create that amazing show.
I know. I have a venture fund now, and so it's just,
I know.
I'm so uh, neglectful of everything else I'm trying to do. But that would be fun though.
Yeah, we have only 24 hours every day,
Yeah.
right?
Waiting for a startup to fix that.
Right, right. I don't know if we spend enough time on your books. Maybe you could just dive in a little bit more into that.
Sure. I
Do you have anything
book,
coming up? You working on something?
yeah, I don't know if I have the copy of it here. I've got um a new book coming out in I think next month, month after, Imposter
Oh,
Syndrome. So that's a new book I have coming out. And then the last one I did, Mr. Whisper, which came out a few months ago, is basically the premise is, what happens when people are using little AI personality bots to influence people. I think that this technology is incredible, but I also think that you can't just not ask questions about these things or how children use it or how people interact with it because for every good actor like an OpenAI or Anthropic, you're going to have bad actors that are going to look at these as opportunities to exploit or do other stuff with it. So I kind of address that as a little bit of a topic in the book Mr. Whisper, which is available now. And
is
then,
it
all of my books have some
nonfiction or fiction?
fiction, fiction. It's fiction. It's a thriller. I write a couple different characters, a couple different series. One is the Theo Cray series. He's a computational biologist who hunts serial killers. Then I have the Jessica Blackwood series. She's a former magician who became an FBI agent. And then I have Sloane McPherson, who is an police diver in South Florida. And then I write Brad Trasker, who is a former counterintelligence operative who now works in tech. And so I each one of them had their own series, and now I put them together in the same books.
Well, I like the fact that you just mentioned that we need to be aware of all the risks related to AI. So, what do you think? Do you think AI will destroy humanity? It's a big question.
Well, I hope not. I think that it's like any other powerful thing, fire or electricity or anything else. When used right, it just absolutely improves the status of humanity and improves the quality of life. When used poorly, we can make poor decisions. Atomic energy, the same thing, and I think that when you see the positive impact it can have, the fact that I've known people that have gotten medical advice from it that was super helpful, in some cases life-saving. And you think that when you have the ability to have ChatGPT help you with questions and you go in and go talk to your doctor about, and that's always the thing you don't want to get rid of out of that, you have this incredible tool that can make things better. Education, we talked about before. I think ChatGPT makes a wonderful tutor. I don't think it replaces teachers. In a last interview I did with Jakob Pohatsky, who is the chief scientist at OpenAI, he made a very important point, which is that AI doesn't replace teachers. A job of a teacher is to inspire us. AI can be a complement to these things. And I think if we understand the place of these things, we can have a very healthy relationship with it. I think sometimes people in tech get very confused and will be like, well, when AI does everything, I'm like, okay, when it does everything, um, is it going to replace Taylor Swift? Because I think people like to go watch Taylor Swift. I think people want to go see experiences. If I'm going to take a class on Egyptian archaeology, I would like to talk to a teacher who was actually in the field who could tell me about the Valley of the Kings. I want to talk to people who have real experiences. And then I want the AI to help me understand a lot more about it. I think that people forget that, the number one product of humans is culture. And AI can help us produce this. AI can make facsimiles of culture. A person can use a tool to make something that's entertaining and just like maybe a human artist might do it, but it still takes humans to appreciate it. And still, not everything is about being the most perfect thing you can. When it comes to writing, I love Stephen King. Stephen King, eventually we could have AI that might write at that level, but it's not going to be as fun as knowing there's this crazy guy in Maine writing these horror stories. And Tom Cruise, the way that Tom Cruise gets people into the box office to go see the latest Mission Impossible movie isn't to tell you about the CGI or the special effects. He goes out and he does a real stunt. Now, we already
Exactly.
have robots that do stunts. You can go to Disneyland and see Spider-Man do backflips, but if Tom Cruise says, yeah, we've got a mechanical robot that did the stunt, that'd be cool once. Then he'd be like, oh, you're not going to do it. Not as cool. And we forget about that, I think, often in tech. how much we like people like to see people doing things. And I think that AI will be everywhere. There will be forms of AI entertainment. We'll have AI stunts. We'll have all kinds of stuff, but also lots of room for people to get more opportunities for people to do things.
I agree. I agree. Let me ask you one more question. On my podcast and generally everywhere, there's a lot of conversation about the AI race. What do you think about the AI race? And should we take a different approach? Should we collaborate?
I don't know that China, when we talk about China, we have to you have to distinguish between the CCP, which controls China, the small minority there that has controls the rest of the population there. My Chinese friends are great, they're creative, they're imaginative, whatever, but they live under a totalitarian regime that doesn't allow free speech, doesn't allow dissent, and is can be absolutely brutal when it comes to opposing points of view and stuff. It's not This is the same people that disappeared students after the Tiananmen massacre, and so we still don't know what happened to them. And so I think that we have to think about the difference between the two. I don't know that the CCP knows how to cooperate. I don't know that they know how to do that or want to do that. It would be great. It would be wonderful. But we see how they treat their own citizens. And then, well, why would they be any more fair to us or whatnot? I think there are amazing things coming out of Chinese labs. There's an incredible amount of resilience from people there who are able just to ignore and focus on what they need to do. But, uh, but to collaborate with them would mean that there would have to be a kind of an openness and a sense of trust, and that doesn't exist.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer because I heard different opinions, and this podcast is all about exploring different perspectives. We talk a lot about AI race, but at the same time, if we all race and we don't stop and slow down and regulate AI and put a lot of thought into what we're doing, then it can be
Yeah,
dangerous for humanity,
yeah,
right?
but regulation can carry its own problems too, in the sense that we think that you're solving a problem, but maybe you're impeding the progress, the benefits from it. India post partition, when India gained its independence, looked around the world to figure out what economic models to follow, and they followed kind of post World War II Britain, which was a more socialist top-down control. And they prevented the importation of large machinery, et cetera. They prevented the industrialization of India. And so India lost ground behind other countries like Hong Kong and even China. And so India has some of the most brilliant mathematicians and scientists on the planet. They come here and they run companies. Like there are more Indian billionaires in America than there are other foreign-born for anything else. And so you see an incredible thing, but in the wrong system. When it talk about like regulation, the challenge is, are you solving a problem? Or are you creating a problem? We had a global pandemic effort to try to prevent a pandemic, and I would say the best evidence says that the coronavirus, the COVID-19, came out of a lab in China that was part of this network, that was part of a thing to prevent a thing and caused a thing. And that to some people it's a controversial take, but I think it's very worthy having a conversation about this. And this was an effort to regulate a thing. And people who want to regulate AI won't even talk about that, won't even have that conversation about that. And I'm like, okay, so you want to talk about how you're going to prevent the next thing. We can't even establish how the last thing happened. We have a lot of evidence here. So I am pro-regulation, in the sense that, we need to think about that, but it depends. When it comes to AI, I don't think I've heard any really good ideas about it. And I think sometimes the people shouting the loudest are people who won't acknowledge the reality of where we are or what's happened before.
Well, I think many people in this AI community changed their mind. In the beginning, everyone was saying we need to be careful, we need some regulations. And then we got into this stage where we're actively entered this AI race, and everyone in this AI community starting to say we don't want any regulations.
Yeah, what's happened though too is a lot more people understand it. Part of the problem is that early on, a few years ago, a lot of the people who were AI safety researchers weren't technical because it was all theoretical until the GPT models really leaped forward and we saw the capability there. You could talk about this abstract someday if you have these things, but then they're also talk about things that we don't know how they work. Now we understand a lot more. We understand the brittleness of them. We understand that they are very different than we think. We didn't copy the human brain. These things are very different. So there's a lot more people who are using this stuff who have a better understanding of it. And I'd say that's part of why the sentiment has changed. So we go, okay, we get this. We understand we build these things. Also, our best safeguard against runaway AI is somebody else having AI that looks out for this. If you get a situation where the only AI development happening is done in secret, which has caused problems before. I mean, that's one of the things. And when you start looking in pandemic, research and whatnot, you find out that we've had outbreaks of stuff before, things that were done in secret because you become very, very sloppy about your protections. People don't know what you're doing. So I think that we have this environment now where as people make discoveries, other people go replicate, they try them. You could try to force this, but the problem is then you have to have somebody be a gatekeeper on what should be shared, what shouldn't, and they're often the worst at trying to evaluate this. Remember 2 years ago, a year ago, people who were pro AI regulation, when you brought up the China question, go like, well, we don't cut off H100s. They won't have access to the H100s, so we can stop them. Well, I didn't stop DeepSeek. DeepSeek figured out how to do that anyways. Had we listened to their ideas a year ago, followed the people who were we need to do the pauses or the hard regulationists, we would completely be caught by surprise by now, and we might have been behind. And so I think that's one of the things there's not a lot of an accounting for that. We had in the mid 1990s, there was the Clipper chip proposal, which was this idea that we should be putting back doors into every microprocessor because what if people use them for bad things? And the idea was the United States government, the NSA should have an encryption key to get this. And we're told, well, this is okay. It will only affect nobody. It's one of these things. It's just a case to prevent these things from being used for bad purposes. And two things happened. Turned out, people used AI to, use microprocessors to build, spam farms to hack other people, whatever. But it didn't create the catastrophic problems we predicted. Also, that encryption standard they suggested quickly got broken. Had that happened, every single computer on the planet would have been open to bad actors. Had we done what the regulators, the people proposing regulation had suggested. And I see that pattern repeating again, no, we understand the problem better than the people building it, and I think there has to be a collaboration. I think that
Absolutely.
You get labs now. And I think you're seeing that now. OpenAI and Anthropic have said, hey, this is what we think makes sense. Let's try to do this. To have these conversations without these people in the room is just silly to me.
Yeah, no, I agree that we need to collaborate. I mean, within the companies, legal department, compliance department, they need to work closely with product. You need to have AI governance by design early on. And I don't think companies need to focus on regulations because regulations are always behind technology. What you need to do is establish your principles, your values within the company.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that, it's having people in governments who are briefed and understand this. I think it's keeping people aware of what these updates are. I think it's letting people know the status of this. We had, there was the suggestion that above building a model over a certain amount of compute used this, should be prevented or limited or gated or whatever. And I'd ask the people involved in this, okay, what if I'm using synthetic data to build this model? What if I'm using another computer to create the data, then train it on? And they're like, I'm like, you didn't even think about that. You're proposing this thing and you're not even aware of the current state of how we're training things. And that was a frustrating thing for me, was to find out that some of the people proposing some of the technical things were just not technically literate about the currents. And some are, many are. I don't want to say they don't know what they're doing. And I think there are people who know what they're doing who have a very different take than I do. But that was my experience.
On my podcast, I asked my guests about kindness. What does kindness mean to you? And do you have any person in your life who is always kind to you and brings positive emotions to your life?
Oh, yeah. I have been the beneficiary of kindness from all kinds of people. One of the kindest people I know is my father. My father is a very kind person. He is a person that volunteers. He helps people out. He is a person that's willing to, do what he can to help other people. I fall very short of that, but I really, really respect that. I would say that all of the people I'm in business with are kind people, are people that have this aspect about them. And, you look for clues. Everybody can say they're kind, but you look at how much do they go out of their way to help other people. With Interdimensional, my co-founder, like me, he keeps a calendar open for college kids who want to ask questions and just want to figure out how to get a career in AI. And I think that you look for these clues. And so I certainly, you know, could do a lot more to increase my capacity for this, but I'm grateful to the people around me that have been that. I was very, the people at OpenAI were super. I was a guy that didn't have I never worked at a tech company before, never worked there. But Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, they looked at what I was doing and said, hey, let's give this guy a chance. And that was certainly, kind to me. I watched Sam do uh, in innumerable numbers of acts of kindness. I've watched him, spend, give time to, founders who were way far off from having any idea what they want to do and giving them advice. I watched him take out time out of his day to help, a new employee understand, how to navigate some complex issues. That's one of the things that's been really helpful for me is to watch people who have every excuse in the world not to be kind, but actually exceptionally kind. And I would say Sam is a very kind person, and I take a lot of inspiration from him. His bandwidth is incredible. I get a response from him. I know people, he'll respond to them, which is great. So I've seen other people like that I really, really respect.
I think it's great that you're saying that, because if you spend an hour or two on X, you would think that Sam is a villain. So it's very nice to hear that there's so many kind words about him.
Well, it's nobody who knows him. It's people who are playing. They have a cartoon in their head and they think they know the plot to it and they think they know the characters to it. It's just a thing because I get this and it's like, whoa, what's he like? I'm like, talk to people who know him. And it's the stories. It's not, I've known people that like professionally disagreed with him. There have been employees who said, I don't like this approach towards it, but I can, show you anecdote after anecdote experience. I think this is a thing that no other CEO would do. Nobody do this. But, we were so conditioned by Hollywood and movies like The Social Network and whatnot about like the tech bro archetype that anybody who comes forward, all of a sudden they're going to have that baggage in their head. And it's funny because some of the people I think who would describe themselves as free thinkers don't realize how much they lean into that tropish sort of thinking. And it's just,
Very
don't know what to say.
too.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is, I've had, at one point I was ready. Spent 2 years open and I was going to leave. I was really concerned about making sure that AI was widely deployed. Like, how do we make sure that everybody else gets access to these models? And Sam had told me, like, I see a world where we make sure that everybody gets access to ChatGPT, for free. And at that point, it was super expensive to do that. And then he found a way. And I thought that was, amazing. You could say, well, it's a marketing thing. Like, well, maybe, but it's a super useful one. Worked out really well. Google figured out, the idea of, they've ended up monetizing search, but they still created an incredible tool. Google search changed the way we think about the world. And I think about what Sam's done with ChatGPT and making this thing so widely available like that. And, coming from a place that I sincerely believe is wanting people to have this and not just, oh, how do I make money from this? And as a company should make money some way, but.
Yeah. Please continue your podcast. I think you're doing an amazing thing. You opened the door, into that company, showing all these amazing people working on this product that is used by so many of us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting. Each week, or when they tell me, hey, you're going to be talking to so and so, I'm excited to find out who I'm going to have a conversation with. Yeah, I feel very lucky to have the opportunity to do the podcast, and thank you for listening.
Absolutely. And thank you for your time, and I hope we will connect again.
Thank you.